Welcome back, friends. In this video, we're going to walk through how to take a concept sketch to a fully realized 3D concept render. I'm going to cover the process I use for hard surface modeling inside Blender, including approaches that don't rely on any paid add-ons. And we're also going to cover some seamless texture creation techniques inside Photoshop that can unlock a massive amount of variation and realism in your textures. So stick around, I'm going to throw as much useful information into this video as I can, and let's get started. I think the main goal with this is to try and keep it add-on agnostic as well. But for this tutorial, I will be using the Bull Tool add-on, which does come with Blender by default. And if there are any others, I'll mention them as I go. So let's do it. Get the default cube and move it up by 1 meter. Now let's just block out the proportions of roughly what I want this crate to look like. Add some chamfers in. I'll select these edges and subdivide. This is one of my preferred ways of adding some edge loops. And I know that means that there is more than 4 verts on this. And in this case, I'm okay with that because my focus is on design and not creating a final game asset. Also means I can push and pull. So I've got some basic proportions in now. I'm going to shift right click to set my 3D cursor, and we'll bring in a cube, and I'll show you the Bull Tool add-on, which again is free. I'm just going to turn cavity on so we can see what we're doing a little bit more. So I select my cube and I shift click on the object, and then I'll hit Control/, and that's going to use this to create 2 non-destructive meshes. One of them is the original object and one of them is a duplicate. For context, I'll just show you the Bull Tool add-on. It's kind of what it does is it creates a Boolean modifier on the original mesh. So if I hit Control-, it'll be a little bit more obvious. It's a cool non-destructive way of cutting in and out from your shapes. So I'll delete that, get rid of the unused Boolean. What I'm going to do as well is search for a bevel. I'm going to shift click and drag just to make it smaller. We'll shade smooth, and then I'll search for weighted normal. And what that's going to do is if I go into this drop down and turn wireframe mode on. So you can see it's a single bevel, otherwise referred to as a chamfer. But the weighted normal set to face area is going to mean that the shading is kind of going to average out and favor the direction of the faces. But this is going to give me that sort of beveled effect without me having to add a ton of geometry. So I might delete those actually. And then after that, I'll run the Bull Tool again with Control/. Just means I can have that applied to my other one, and it just creates a little bit more separation. So Alt-Z for see-through mode, just going to drag that all the way through, and then we can sort of get this shape going. Edge mode, select the edges, Control-B to chamfer that. So I'm going to duplicate this. We use it as a secondary Boolean with Bull Tools. And the nice thing about multiple objects like this is that Boolean is affecting that first mesh, but not the one that I had already separated. So it's quite an easy way of doing that section. I'm going to double tap G to slide these edges in. And then I'll hit C to reverse the direction, and I can just drag that out. And for this section here, I might do the same, but I'm just going to extrude that maybe. Go into side mode. If I hold Alt while I'm panning around, that's going to snap. And then if I hit Alt-Z, I can select these verts and just drag them down. I use Shift for fine tuning. So I'm kind of using the sketch as like a guide. If I hit Alt-H, I can reveal any cutter object that's hidden if I need to. So it's kind of the same process for all the other shapes. Double tap G, scale on the Y, grab this face. If I show wireframe, what these booleans are also going to be doing is auto-generating just some connecting loops so that it doesn't break. If I go into matte cap and select something really shiny for a second, yeah, I think the shading's pretty good. You might see like just a little bit of pinching over there, and you can always drag up the weight on the face weighted normals just to remove that. Let's go back to Studio. So we've got that. I'm going to duplicate this, rotate it 90, set origin to geometry, which I have on a shortcut, and I'll just place that in the middle. And if I want to change this into a cut, I can just delete this object. So this, I might do a cut as well. And maybe instead of a cut, actually undo that. And I'm going to select this other Boolean object and hit Control+, and that doesn't work either. So the reason that is because there's overlap. I've got a cutting face here that matches the other one, and they're fighting with each other. So sometimes I might have to go in and just manually add an edge loop, bevel, select these faces here and hit extrude. And I'm just going to hit escape to cancel, and then scale on the Y just to push these out. And I'm going to scale Y0 to flatten those on both sides. Hit Control-R to repeat last action. So now the shading is a bit more fixed. I can alt click on these, or alt shift click. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. If in doubt, I can always go to side view and edge mode and select both. I'll just drag those out on the X. So something like that. I might even select this face here or select this object and search for a mirror modifier. And I can have the mirror object to be the cube, and I'll just make sure that's centered. I'll go flip and bisect on the Y, and then I can go into edit mode. And it looks like it's using this side of the mesh, and it's just going to be mirroring that to the other side. So I might even select these corners, just check that that's the right side. It is. And I hit Control B, add another layer of bevel. If I select all of these and hit Alt before I click the adjust, I can adjust the modifiers in all of those. I'm just going to drag that in a little bit, just make it a little bit more fine. So it's checking proportions here. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that as a base. So we'll go into each of these and we'll apply the booleans. I'm going to leave the bevel and the weighted normal. If you use the hard ops add-on, that'll just be under smart apply. So definitely a handy add-on, but totally possible to apply that stuff without it. Now I can come in here and add a little bit more customization. So I'm going to go in here and add a few more loops to this corner. Might select both of those, do them at the same time. Now I'm going to add in a cylinder. We'll right click shade smooth. Just going to drag it down, bring it all the way in, and let's make another cutter object. I'm going to slash again. We'll hide this and select apply, and now I have this sort of hinge object here. Delete the cutters that I'm not using anymore. So I'm still using this one. And the reason I applied that is I could just I for insert, edit the bevel. So there might be a few too many cuts on this. So if I select those and hit Control X, it's just going to simplify those. And part of the beauty of this face weighted normal approach with a single bevel is we'll go into rendered mode and bring in a light here. Mostly I'm still selling that transition. Anytime it's really obvious that its lower poly is on the edges there. And this is a trick that Star Citizen actually uses quite a lot to bake a lot of their high poly bevels. So I'm going to stick with that just because it's simpler for me for shading purposes. And let's look at my ref. We'll add a few more things in. So now I have this separated. I can start editing, you know, like the bottom sections. Scroll that back down. And we'll add a chamfer in. I'll add one in down here. Bring in a cylinder. And if I shift select this mesh now and hit Control L and then P, it's just going to copy modifiers, making sure I apply scale to match that bevel scale. The fact that it's scale dependent means that if I hit Control period, I can get into the edit mode for the object scale. So on the object here, you can see the scale is 1, but if I hit S, I'm actually editing the scale of the object, which by extension is kind of editing the scale of the bevel itself. But for now, I'm just going to keep it. I'm just taking the time to match what I have. Now I've indicated some cut lines here. I could easily achieve that by just bringing in a cube with the bool tool, just go shift slash. And because those modifiers are set up, and if I turn these off, it's kind of really flat, but on's like that. If I just hide that, and if I alt click on apply the boolean, that's another way to apply the boolean to both at the same time. And then I can just merge those again or recenter origin to geometry. And this is definitely not, you know, best practice for game modeling. But I'm still sort of thinking about this as a concept mesh. A definite alternate to that method could just be add in an edge loop. I'll bevel that to get 2. I'll bevel those again. I'll scroll up to get 1. And then as long as I have edges selected with 2, I can hit Control minus to reduce the selection. And then if I scale and hit Shift X, it means I can scale on everything but the X axis. And that's another valid way of adding in kind of like those loops. Just remembering that I'll have to edit the bevel height. Hit Control plus to increase the selection and go individual origins. I can scale on the X just to tighten that as well. That's just as valid a way. Just depends what the needs of your project are. So I'll use that object set origin to geometry. Highly recommend setting up a shortcut for that, which I do have, but I thought it'd be good to show. And with this, we're going to mirror. We'll select one of these objects again. There we go. There it is. We'll move on. So for the rest of these details that I'll be adding, it's very much the same approach. Just introduce a Boolean object, find the right placement for it. I can use this on multiple objects as well. So this cube I can cut in. And if I hit the question mark key, I can just isolate that. If I shift click on vertex snapping, it means I can also drag this out and just hover over this vertex here, and that'll straighten that. When I hit question mark again, just a very quick way to flatten that out. So stealing the modifier from this hinge. Now's probably a great time to call out another really useful add-on, which is Mesh Machine. So if I pull up the Mesh Machine shortcut, I can hit change width. That's just going to change the width of that after the fact, which is really handy. Unfortunately, it's not doing them all, so I might just go back in and redo it. So again, we can start to see a little bit of shading. If increasing the face weight doesn't end up solving that, which in this case I think it has, you can always go in and put wireframe mode on, and sometimes it's a result of having a really harsh angle on some of these sections. So you can always come in and subdivide some edges like that, or even just connect your two edges like here and here. And that way, this boolean here is favoring these instead of having to reach all the way across at a harsh angle. But between adding some small tweaks like that and your weighted normal, a lot of the shading issues will resolve. So you can see this is quite methodical, but for this kind of hard surface designs, it just allows you to block things out quite quickly. I grab this face here and just duplicate that down and hit P, separate by selection, center origin to geometry. I'll just make sure rotation and scale is applied. And I'm just going to bring that down, extrude it out, scale it in, bring it up. We'll type in mirror, select this object. And for this, it doesn't look like it's perfectly centered. So I'm going to select this middle edge. I'll go Shift 2 and then 2. That'll put our 3D cursor on that center line. And then I'll just hit set origin to 3D cursor. And it's going to resolve that. So I want it on the X and the Y. We've got those little bottom pads. So you can see I'm actually going in to a mesh like this and just removing unnecessary edge loops. It's just going to help simplify the Boolean geometry. You know, I might make a geometry nodes object. Just going to pull in this cube. I'll just go mesh to curve, curve to mesh, drag out profile and type in curve circle. I'll just drag the radius all the way down, drag the resolution down. And then I can just select individual edges here. I've got a little bit more control, non-destructive control. And this might seem like a bit of a convoluted way potentially of doing this, but it is going to allow me to kind of non-destructively make any kind of curve shape with a very specific shape, because I've got access to, again, if I Control Shift B, I've still got access to the edit tools that I'm familiar with. And if this is a really small object and I want more fine control, I can just bring in a math node. I'll drag that into radius, and I'm just going to multiply that, or actually divide that by 10. So it's like 10 times less sensitive, maybe even 50. It means I can just drag this around much slower. So I'll probably use that for radius, and I can even shift click that just for that fine control. So another mirror modifier, just copy that over. I'm just making these little latch or latch looking objects here. If I was making this into like a game asset, I might spend some time actually thinking about how this latch mechanism works. So if you're curious about a very quick process to come up with designs like this, I'll link to a video, but it's a very, very fast way of coming up with just sort of a base to work from in Photoshop. So head over and check that out if you're curious, because when I get to the modeling phase in here, super easy now that I've sort of established a rough sketch direction. So just making a single hinge asset, which I can then mirror. Another add-on that's very useful to sort of speed up that process is Hard Ops, where I can shift click on the object I want to use as the mirror object, hit Alt X, and we'll just select the mirror axis. Same for this. So using that trick now, just to make sure all of my meshes are getting mirrored correctly. I'm just getting this pill shape, and I might combine this with an array, and it just gives me a level of non-destructive control. I can mirror that using Hard Ops this time, but you could just as easily set it up like I showed you before, hide the UI, and already, like, just through following a bunch of these simple steps, we're starting to really add some complexity. So using that slide trick again, just trying to find a good spot for some of those booleans. So let's set up some materials real quick. I go into Eevee, and I think it's Bool Tools that brings in this cutters collection, but I'm just going to turn those off so I can see what I'm doing, and we'll set up some super basic materials as well. So we'll go white, make a new material, we'll call it accent. I'm just going to drag that down, give it some roughness and metallic. Now anything I want to match that, I can just shift select it, hit Control L and M for material to link materials, increase the shininess, tweak the weighted normal on the meshes that I need to. So if I want, I can always come in and select this edge. I'm going to solo this, and I'll show you why I like to delete unnecessary edge loops. So if I selected this right now, I could add a bevel there, and that's fine and all because it's on a loop. But if I Control X on these, means I can Alt-Shift select this, still add that bevel, but if I wanted to, I could come in on a different side and add a different kind of bevel. So I kind of like the ability to do that. So I'm just coming in and adding that layer of complexity. So I'll unhide my cutters and just make sure these are placed in a way that's not going to interfere with the shading. Make a new material here and just call it mid-metal. Hit E and let's just color pick that gray. Why not? Put on rendered mode and we'll bring in a point light. I'm going to change this to Eevee for now. I'm just going to dial in this material as well. Kind of like a rough metal. Turn off ray tracing just to remove some of these artifacts for now. And even with white materials, you'll notice that I'm just dragging that slider down. It still feels white, you know, especially if it's lit. And it's just going to be a little bit more softer on the eyes than like a pure white. Like when I drag this all the way up, it's much too much. Like it's kind of, this asset's really ugly now because it's way too contrasty. So I'll add a material called Accent Bright, and that's going to be a really shiny metallic object there. And the reason that's not showing up at the moment is because back in the geometry nodes, if I hit this and press G and select the modifier, it's applying it to the underlying mesh, but not to the modified mesh. So I've just got to bring in a set material node and we can select Accent Bright. And there it is. So now I go back to the shader, I can edit that and we'll see the changes reflected. So far so good. I want to introduce some of these accent lights and screen UIs as well. So I might pop a screen UI up on the top here. I know in the concept it's on a different face, but we're here now where we've made our bed. So now we have to lie in it. So just adding in some bloom here, mixing that on a lighten layer with the original image, just so I can tweak the intensity. I'll bring in some of those accent lights as well. And this is a fun, really quick way. Again, just using those simple Bool tool add-ons that come stock with Blender, hitting Control/ so that we're sort of dynamically creating new meshes. Again, I can just go back and fine tune the overall fineness of these bevels. I can move this object maybe down and in on the y-axis, so I can dynamically sort of place lights along here wherever I like them. Make a new material, drag that in and pump up the intensity. We've got our post-processing layer, adding to that, and I can select everything. I'll go individual origins, just drag those in. I'm just trying to find sort of like pleasing sci-fi proportions. So going through setting materials, just something that looks nice. So just making sure all the modifiers are correctly applied. So now we've got something to work with. We've got like a clean version that's just using simple Principled BSDF shaders. Let's see how we can introduce a little bit more complexity to the shaders themselves. So to help us with that, let's just set up a basic scene, hit Alt-G on this plane to recenter it. Before I do that, I'm just going to select this whole thing and just add it to a collection called Crate. That's just going to allow me to easily Shift-G, select a collection. We can select the whole thing. I'm just going to drag that up. Now I can recenter this and I'm going to drag this backdrop up and we'll bevel this with some edge loops and set it to shade smooth. So I've got this simple studio backdrop. I'm going to set up my camera, and with camera mode, if I go to view, camera to view, I can now move around the viewport. With the camera selected, if I right click, I can adjust the focal length, and I would recommend also setting this up to a shortcut. Mine's set to Control-Alt-F, so I can jump in and out of that mode really quickly. So let's set the camera, we'll turn rendered view on, and let's just keep it in. Switch over to cycles. I'll just bring in an area light or some kind of fill light. So when previewing this stuff, it's kind of good to have it in its own scene. I'll hit Control B and just select that viewport so we're only rendering what we actually see in the camera view. So now I can sort of art direct this lighting. And the main considerations I'm thinking about when doing this is if I'm trying to showcase a design here, I want to pick an angle where I can see as much of the object as possible. So same with the focal length. I might choose something a bit longer. I'll just drag the camera back on the Z-axis, local Z. So I'm hitting G and double tapping Z. And I'm just trying to pick a position for this light in a way that shows off the forms as much as possible. So some kind of lighting setup that's completely between the camera and the object, that's like pointing towards the object. It tends to be a little bit flatter than something that is to a different angle. So even this top down, I quite like because it is picking up a lot of those beveled edges. So this might be a good place to start. I'm also hitting some of those highlights on the accents there. So that's quite nice. I'm going to duplicate that now. Reset rotation. I'm going to rotate this on the x-axis, y-axis. And really what I'm doing now is I'm just searching for a side light here that's going to pick up some more details that I want to showcase. So what I might do for this is in this light, I'll just add an object constraint and I'll say track to, and let's just track to this lid. And now I can move this light around and it's just going to be constantly pointing towards the asset. That's going to allow me to really easily choose an angle. So I can drag the size down as well if I want. I could even go in and edit the color slightly with two multiple colors. You can see that if this is just pure white and I'm placing it in another spot, it starts to flatten it again. But even just tweaking the color slightly, now it's introducing much more form information because our brains are differentiating between the different light sources. I quite liked blue light over there. Another really nice trick is I can always drag in a light and I'll bring it in somewhere that's maybe catching some highlights. So if I hide and unhide that, I'm just capturing a little bit of that information there. So I can do that and you'll notice how it's lighting up that ground plane. And if I want it to just hit some accent pieces, what I can do is go to shading and light linking and I'll just hit crate. And now this light is only going to be affecting that crate collection. And even more control, I can even go into visibility and uncheck diffuse, say, and only have the glossy channel selected. Let's go hide and unhide. And just introduce a little bit of information just to show that off a bit more. And let's keep it simple. We'll leave it like that for now and we'll go back to our materials. So we're on materials now. Let's talk about how to set up a really powerful texture where we can get a lot of bang for our buck and use it in any of our assets really. So what I want to do is in any kind of image editing software, I can go in here and we'll just work at 1K for now. And I'm going to make a few different grunge maps. So I've got a few grungy textures here. You can definitely grab your own online. Something like this would be kind of nice. I'm just going to drag that up to fill the canvas, desaturate it. And the first step is to make it tiling. So we're going to go view and go pattern preview. If you're not a big 2D user, you can use tools like Materialize. I'm pretty sure it has an auto seamless function, but I'm going to turn on pattern preview. Then I can just alt click and drag this and we'll erase out those seams just to get us started. And pattern preview is a pretty darn quick way of getting a seamless texture going. So merge that, change the angle. We might scale it up, put a mask on that and invert the mask, just dab away. So as long as I'm not seeing any seams, I'm not too worried. I can hit J for the spot healing brush. I'll turn off pattern preview and we'll Control Shift Alt and E to make a layer on top. We'll turn on pattern preview again and we'll drag it across, drag it up. We'll just inspect for any final seams and use our spot healing brush, just dab it around. Again, since this is a grunge texture we're creating, I'm not too worried about accuracy here, and you'll see why later on. So this is my first one. Let's make another one and let's make sure it is differentiated. So I might grab another texture here and let's desaturate, turn on pattern preview again and start getting rid of some of that. Might drag a duplicate across and up. Again, we could erase, make a copy of everything, do the same thing again. If I want to unify the values of this, I'll make a copy of everything. I might set this to lighten. Now the light values are kind of all the same, and I can go into the blending properties and drag up underlying layer just to bring back some of those cracks. If I alt click, I can fine tune that transition. We'll merge again, turn on pattern again, drag it across and up just to check for seams. I'm pretty happy with that. I'm not too worried about repetition in the tiling as well, I don't think. But what I can always do is make a full copy, go Control T, and we'll just hit 50% on the width and the height. So we can get it exactly half. If I duplicate 4 of those, now we have sort of like we've increased the scale. And I can always put a mask on this and dab away with a soft round brush. And that's just going to help us. We'll merge again, we'll rotate it 90 degrees and we can dab away at that one. And it's still going to be like repeated, but now we've just given ourselves a little bit more scale to work with. So I'm happy with that. Let's merge it down and Control click it. So to get rid of these fringes, just in crop mode, just going to select the edge and check delete cropped pixels. So we've got 1, we've got 2, a third one here I want to do, let's make it a little bit more metallic. So I'll find some metal. And this is even like, it's pretty low res, seamless metal. But let's use it anyway. I'm just going to duplicate a few times just to get rid of that seam. And we'll duplicate, drag across and up, and just dab on those seams with our spot healing brush again. So for this one, even blur it a little bit more. We'll go Gaussian blur, just drag that up. And this one I'm gonna even darken quite a bit so that I have kind of like a base value range. And then over the top of that, pattern preview on, I'm just gonna select like a blobby weathering brush that I've made. If you're curious about how I'd go about making brushes like this, I'll link a video in the description on brush creation inside Photoshop if that's not something you've done before. So that'll do. I've got 3 kind of generic grunges. I've got a cracky one, a splotchy one, a sort of blobby soft one. I think I might drag in one more. So that's pretty good. I think I like this better. So I'm going to say, let's use this texture, and I might even combine these 2 textures. So let's set this to overlay. Just check it. Seems all right to me. And I'll go 1, 2, 3. Now here comes the real power of this technique for creating a single texture that I can use for a whole bunch of different stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on the layer properties, and I'm just going to isolate the red channel on this first texture. In this texture here, I'm going to isolate the green channel, and in this one, I'll isolate the blue channel. When I combine these together, it's going to look like this. Then I'll just save it out. So I'm going to save this one as a JPEG, and we'll go back to Blender. So let's drag it in. I've called this one RGB grunge. It looks like this. What that's going to allow me to do is basically get 3-for-1 texture. So let's take a look at that. So by default, if I drag this into the roughness channel, and I'll just grab a color ramp so we can see it, we're going to get a lot of this sort of information here. If I hit Control T with the Node Wrangler add-on enabled, I can increase the scale. So already we're getting quite a lot of information here. What I might do as well is change this to object, change this to box. I'll add a little bit of blend. We'll reduce the scale, and I might even create an empty, just whack it over in the corner of my scene, and then I can select that object. I'll call it grunge scale. So now no matter how big or small these objects are, the scale of that grunge is going to be consistent because it's tied to that object scale. So how can I start extracting those different textures I created? I'm going to bring in a separate color node, and if I Control-Shift click on that, you can see already now I can cycle between those different maps. So already that's 3-for-1. So what I can do now is I can tweak the values of this red grunge texture, and I might even make it, like really subtle. So I can drag this black up, I can drag this white down. And for this, I might join this again, and I'll do this in cycles. That's what I'm going to be using for the final render. I might hit this and press C, just bring down that bloom value and threshold as well. So you can see even a really subtle value range between the lightest and darkest value really starts adding to that sense of realism. And you want to be really subtle with it, especially for sort of more realistic materials. And I know we have the scale tied to this grunge object, but I could still use these properties here. Might even Control-Shift click on that ramp just so I can see the scale. So let's say I wanted something like that. So that's one layer. What I can do now is duplicate that, and I'll just change this to green. And I'm going to set the pattern for the green one. I might even Control-X to remove that. And we'll bring in a fresh ramp. Control-Shift click so we can see what we're doing. So I've got this, and that's giving us some kind of different effect that we can now dial in separately. So I want to find the value range of that texture that works nicely for me. And then I can start tweaking the actual values themselves. So this one, I might even want to flip the values to something like that. And let's say I was happy with that. If I Control-Shift, right-click and drag between these 2 ramps, I can introduce a mix node. I'm just going to Control-Shift click that preview as well, and I'll try some different blending options. So I'll increase the factor, and we'll try some different ones. Maybe darken, multiply, overlay is a pretty good one too. Or even add overlay seems to be working. And you can see already I can go back into this separate scale control and independently edit the scale of those different grunges. So this is before, we've got 1 texture. This is after, we've got 2 textures. And that third one, we can use for something else if we want, because I think we've got enough detail here already. So what I could do is let's copy these nodes over to this metal material. We'll hook it up, and you can see it's already got a slightly different effect on a material that has like a lot more metalness. So quite nice. So I'm not sure if I like this cracky texture on the metal. So I can literally just swap that out. I'll change it to the blue channel instead. We'll tweak some values. Now we've got this scratchy texture here. Again, it's fixing those shading issues by increasing the weight of that weighted normal modifier. So I want to be able to tweak these values to where I can actually see some of those scratches peek through. And I might even flip those so the scratches are the shiny parts, or shinier. Tweaking scale. And you can duplicate these and use them as many times as you want. So keeping in mind with this mix node that whatever blending mode you select, it'll be blending the bottom over the top. So we've just got like a second layer of scale. If I rotate that, 45 degrees on the Z, we'll change the scale. It's just going to increase the frequency. So that's kind of fun. Let's go back to this texture and we'll go into cycles now. We use those same textures to add in some edge wear. So I want to be able to blend between maybe like a painted metal, because this is very non-metallic. And I might Control Shift and click this up, preview it. I'll just make this quite metallic. And Control Shift, right click and drag between those two, get our mix shader. And for the factor, we're going to use a bevel node, up the samples a bit. We'll mix those together. We'll set it to difference. We'll make sure the radius is quite small. If I'm previewing that, you can see it's just kind of isolating where the edges of this mesh is. And I'm just going to use a math node to increase that. We'll change that to a black and white value. If I drag up the multiply, we've got some edges happening. I can bring those edges in a little bit more with a map range node. Increase the intensity, and then finally let's grab one of these, and we're going to have this influence the normal of this bevel node. So I'm going to drag out the blue, which I believe is the scratches, grabbing a ramp, and we'll play with some of these settings. I'll use a map range node instead. It's just going to mix with the bevel. So I've sort of dialed that in now. I've used a map range node to sort of crunch the values of that initial image. You can see at the moment those scratches are black. I'm just going to invert color, maybe before my color ramp, or even at the very start of that chain. So now I'm blending between these two using that mask. I'm just going to flip those around. So we've got painted metal for the majority, and then we've got this second metal kind of peeking through. I'll change the value of that maybe to make it more obvious. And we can go back, tweak some of these values as well to have it peek through more or less. So again, even looking at the back here, and noting to myself that subtlety is really key. If I want to use a different matte for this, I can just swap it out. And I think something like that might minus away from that edge wear much more so. So I think it's working better for this effect. And you will have to let that render for a bit if you've got denoising on, just to see that roughness resolve. I'm going in now, just making it even more subtle. A nice looking materials, really tight value ranges, and subtlety is really key. Going in and adding details here, another cool trick with booleans is if I select this top face and hit Control-Shift-N to flip the normals, when I then hit bevel, it's actually going to do an inverse bevel. That's a nice way of adding in some non-destructive transitions just to soften that a little bit more. So select an edge, hit Shift-G, select by similar length. I can add in some of those here. And for a mesh like this, I might select all these faces and just hit F. That's going to merge those all down and remove the loops. And now I can easily perform that. So here's the final render here. I took a viewport screenshot and just applied a little bit of post and a very small amount of weathering paint over in Photoshop. And we have a final asset render. If you'd like to take a look under the hood, I'll include the scene files in my resource page on Gumroad. If you want to check out any of the add-ons I mentioned in this video, I'll link them in the description. And if you want to learn how to quickly sketch out a design like this in under 20 minutes, you can check out this video here.